Hey, security peeps, we are live with another edition of Breaking Into Cybersecurity. It is CISO Thursdays. I am Renee Small, cybersecurity super recruiter, helping awesome people hire great talent. It's Christmas Eve. It is New Year's Eve. Happy New Year, people. Bye-bye.
Happy New Year.
2020. All right, we're going to go around the horn. The Dutch is here with us today.
The Dutch.
Good morning. Hey,
the
Dutch. So happy to be on with you guys. I love being on with you guys. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Excited to have you here, sir. And he listened. He has a crown. We said festive. James Alex Azar.
James has nothing. James, what's going on?
I am. You know what? I am sympathizing with the people of Hong Kong today. So free Hong Kong.
We got to put a hashtag.
Is it 2021 in Hong Kong yet? It might be.
It is. Yeah. They just did it in Taiwan. So 9 minutes ago, it was a Happy New Year in Taiwan.
Good. Free Hong Kong.
Free Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Naomi Buckwalter.
Thanks for the Hong Kong shout out. My parents are from Hong Kong, so I feel an affinity with them, but I've actually never been. But yes, let's free Hong Kong. 2021.
Someone who's been there many of times and has a lot of friends there. Free Hong Kong.
Free Hong Kong.
So what I hear is the show's going to be there next year, New Year's Eve, Hong Kong. That's the plan.
Yeah, I mean, you hope so. It's an uphill battle to free it.
Right.
But we're talking cyber. We're not talking Hong Kong. I mean, I'm just raising awareness to the issue so people don't live in a bubble.
Yeah.
Very, very true. Okay, folks, our usual, we said we were going to do a wrap today, a 2020 wrap up. Good riddance 2020. James Alex Azar, should we start with you?
How about we talk about how this year started? Right? Does everyone remember what happened in January?
Yeah, we almost went to war.
Yeah,
what happened in January? I can't even remember.
So in January, President Trump took out Qasem Soleimani, and we had Citrix. At the time, the Citrix thing in January felt like SolarWinds feels today.
Yeah.
People forget Citrix because COVID came on and like nothing could have saved Citrix more than COVID. Like those guys were looking down a black hole. And Citrix happened, and I think that's something we have to remember, that SolarWinds that everyone's kind of like talking about, and we're seeing more data now when we're getting more factual data, is very interesting. What do you think, Dutch?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it was 5 years ago. That's my impression. I mean, everything sort of post mid-March, until you just said I'd kind of forgotten, honestly, what that was in the news at the time, and so everything just flipped, in early in March, and everything just took on totally new dimensions, I guess.
Feels like a total blur. Like everything pre-COVID.
So,
you can't remember. I can't even remember what was happening then.
Well, I think there's like a thing to what we went through as people, right? Beyond cyber. Right beyond all of that, just like the human element of this. Renee, you do awesome segments with the psychologist with Dan, on Mondays. I love those. During this pandemic, just tuning in for 10 minutes and just listening into that was just okay. Breathe, But there's aspects to what we've been through as a humanity. And we were so focused on SolarWinds and Citrix. And when was the last time we all got to hang out and be in the same place? And, there's a lot to that. There's a lot to that took a toll on all of us.
But do you guys feel but I feel like as a community though, there's actually probably more connectivity. I mean, because people aren't traveling. You're not in board meetings. You're not at all the shit. I mean, so we were all, including me, lamenting, we're not at Black Hat. We're not at, whatever. But I think via the social, this type of a setting, we actually connected with a lot of other people, because all these, new podcasts came up or new topics came up. And so in some ways, there's been a ton of connections. So I think the community kind of is resilient, right? Kind of rebounded from the fact that nobody's traveling, nobody's doing all these meetings, nobody's doing all the shows, nobody's doing all those things. And we've actually had a very active, and it's been super healthy, James, to your point, to have these kinds of interactions, because otherwise it's like 9 meetings a day. Oh, I'm on Zoom, yay, like all day long. So this is actually, a great way to connect with other people.
I feel like it was, I'm with you, Dutch. I think that this year, it actually was a crazy, not so busy year for me in particular. I mean, outside of kids and all that other stuff, but security hires and all that, it's been wild. Mm-hmm. And just taking a breather, to James's point. I mean, I jokingly, and it was a joke, but it's true. I was like, I have Dan on every Monday because I want to hear from him. I need centering. Like, I need to hear from him myself. So Dr. Dan, for all of you that don't know, he comes on Mondays, and we did a Mondays where we started it, not on a whim, but I was like, hey, Dan, you should just come on because people I know are struggling.
Right. And
because Dan is a psychologist, and because he laughs when I say, I'm like, Dan, you're seasoned. He goes, you mean I'm the oldest guy you know? But he's been through so many things. I said it. I'm like, Dan, is this like, take me back to what this potentially could have been like. Was it like the Vietnam War? Was it like, civil rights? Like, take us back, because
perspective.
I feel like, perspective, the older people just have so much, they have the perspective, so they're so much more centered and more calm. Like, I feel like the rest of some of us are running around and they're like, it's gonna be okay. We've been through other stuff, And so that part of it, having him on every week, and just doing these podcasts. I mean, I have connected with so many people. So to Dutch's and James's, I know Naomi will say this too. I mean, the 4 of you, like, I didn't know you guys last year.
Not at all. Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, I've made so many friends from this. I mean, real deal, people that I call and text, and it's actually been part of it. It's a blessing and a curse. It's been a real blessing.
Well, I think it centered us as people, right? Because, like, to Dutch's point, we were all traveling and at events, and when you're at an event, you don't nearly interact with as many people, and you end up in some sort of clique where you're with kind of like one group of people throughout the entire event, and you don't really get to meet others. I mean, I don't know that CISO Thursdays would be a thing if it wasn't for COVID.
Right.
And there's parts of that are kind of very, very good, but there's also the challenge that it created on a lot of people from a mental health perspective, from a job perspective. I mean, let's not forget that a lot of people lost their jobs, maybe not in our industry.
Yes.
Maybe not where we live, but our neighbors, our friends, our family, a lot of those people did lose work. And so we're blessed. We're in an industry that was really prospering during this time period because of the nature of people being online, but other industries have been completely shut down, and many of them still are.
And I don't think a lot are coming back. Some of them are coming back.
Well, and it's going to be coming back. Like, I hate the new normal. So I'm saying, we're going back to normal, right? And we're going to go back to normal. Like, we're going to get there at some point or another, over the next few months. Like, I just feel like at some point, after the end of January, I think around Valentine's Day, people are just going to be like, screw this. I'm taking my wife out to dinner at a restaurant, or we're going to go do a weekend because we've been at home with the kids. And now that grandparents are getting their vaccine shots, you're like, hey, grandpa, grandma, you haven't had the kids all year. Take them.
I can't wait for that.
They're yours. We're gone. We're turning off our phones. We're doing what Dutch is doing for the holidays. We're going to a cabin with no cell
Wi-Fi.
No Wi-Fi.
No nothing. Enjoy.
We deserve it. We deserve it.
Yeah, we do.
In the 16-year-old, she was like, wait, what? Like, I didn't tell him ahead of time. I didn't say anything.
That's smart.
Oh, that's funny. That's hilarious.
We broke up the board games and the cards. And
wow.
The 14-year-old was like, is this like what it was like pre-internet? I'm like, yes, this is what it was like.
Yeah, we read books, by the way.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Early says, Happy New Year, cybersecurity pros. How are you all? Have you already talked about the recent SolarWinds hack?
We've killed that.
We've murdered
beaten that one down.
Yeah, murdered that guy.
We've beaten that one down. Early, you got to go back like 2 or 3 weeks. When did it happen? Last week? The week before?
3 weeks ago.
3. Yeah.
Wow, that feels so much longer. But we never went around back to FireEye to just give them the props that they deserve, because they're the first one who actually like put this out there and said there's a problem, and they did CISO's job for them. So props to FireEye. Anyone's listening, you guys really helped us out. So hug ups.
I hope that's the new precedent in the industry, right? Where companies that go through an event are able to put out the IOCs and TTPs and share a little bit more information.
Transparency, yes. That was so underrated. I don't know, but that needs to be shared more widely than it was.
Agreed.
Not enough people noticed that. That was amazing.
Or shouted it out. I mean, I think we internally noticed it, but again, James's echo chamber part, you know, people getting that understanding that that was huge.
Well, I mean, you've got
Go ahead, Dutch. I would say you think the trajectory, like you go back like 4 or 5 years, like nobody wanted to talk about it. And then you sort of see the shift where people in the same industry space, I'll say financial services just as an example, right? Then they would start to talk to each other, right? The CISOs, they would have the secret squirrel channels, like whatever it was, right? And so they're like, no, off the record, like, no, because we realize that they're likely to come after the next person, right? Whoever's day zero was, like we're all about to follow. So then you sort of just see that sort of informal connecting happening in the last few years. But I agree with you, Naomi, like kudos to FireEye for publicly putting it out there, because that is the right type of response, right?
It's the right thing to do. Right.
The criminals collaborate better than we do.
They totally do.
They totally do.
Because they're like, hey, we're in this loose gang. We're all about the anti whatever, right? So they collaborate, much better historically than we have as an industry. We need to do better. And you're right. It starts with transparency. And James, I know you wrote about it, and not throwing rocks at people. So kudos to them for doing a lot of great work when the thing happened, right? That enabled all the rest of us to then.
Yeah. Because Dutch, you and I, we're not competitors. We're on the same team. None of us are competitors with each other. Yeah. And I think once we start realizing that we're on the same team, we have a common enemy. Like, let's go.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, there's an aspect to what used to be the chain reaction when an incident happened, right? Which is, oh my God, don't be that. And then all the marketing people at all the vendors would send out a mass email, don't be like so-and-so, get us, right? And
did they do that this time?
No, very few did. So, I think the immature ones, like the people who hired marketing people that don't come from within the community or haven't been within the ecosystem, they did it people who outsource their marketing to like marketing firms that are like, oh wow, this is great, let's use FUD, and you're like, sorry man, like not a good idea to do that. But I think for a lot of the industry, what SolarWinds brought together, because Dutch touched on 2 very important points that kind of correlate. COVID brought us stronger together as a community. And over that period of time, we fought ransomware, and we were all in that kind of challenging period of time. And then SolarWinds came. And SolarWinds wasn't we were all kind of glued together because of Zoom and podcasts and live streams and all that stuff. But then SolarWinds kind of made us all either stick together, and then anyone who was kind of who wasn't a real part of the community kind of fell off, right? Because, I mean, a lot of people who wanted to post stuff against, I think, SolarWinds or FireEye or any of the victims of this, they don't quite comprehend it. And I think part of our effort now in 2021 has to be to get people to understand that hacks aren't victimless, and that they do have victims, and that those victims have side effects, and that it has a downstream effect on everyone, from a company's financial performance to the staff to the PTSD that develops. I have friends that work at Equifax, because I'm in Atlanta. And what are we, 3 years after Equifax? Like Equifax was September of 17. Some of those guys still go to therapy.
Wow.
Because of it. because they worked for, remember, they discovered it in July. They went into a 100-day period where they were on a secret floor in a building 10 minutes from my home, working 18, 20-hour days under a lot of pressure, trying to, one, remediate and understand the complexity of it. And then when it broke into public, many of them, publicly traded company, and they're on LinkedIn, we're getting death threats, we're getting lawsuits, we're getting all this kind of stuff. And, you know, these breaches, they're not victimless. They have a toll on people's families. I had several, when I started the podcast, I did a live event in 2018 here in Atlanta, and I brought several of the kids whose parents work at Equifax. And I brought them on stage, and they're Girl Scouts, right? And they're Boy Scouts, and they brought in, and we're kind of talking about cyber for them. And then I kind of asked them, I go, so what was it like when, you know, mom and dad were dealing with the breach? And they're like, well, we didn't see them. And they were really upset. And there were periods of times where, you know, months we didn't see mom or dad. Like we'd see them maybe on the weekends for a few hours, but no one talks about that. That's not on any news publication, but that doesn't happen to any other professional, right? A CFO misses his quarterlies. He doesn't miss sleep.
Right.
Yeah, he'll work a few extra days, a few extra hours. He'll build a better presentation. He'll, you know, make a few more phone calls. He'll go present it to the board, go home, go to sleep. But security people, you know, we don't have that luxury. People at FireEye and SolarWinds and all those government agencies that were victims of this, they didn't celebrate Christmas last week. A lot of them worked on Christmas Eve, and a lot of them went to work on Christmas Day after opening gifts with their family and maybe eating breakfast, right? Because they had a job to do. And a lot of them are working right now as we speak, continuing their remediation. But that's what we need to do better in 2021 as a community, is highlighting those stories. Because that's how other people from the outside of our echo chamber are going to start to understand that a breach isn't just a breach. It is no different than, you know, I don't want to compare it because Dutch and I are both veterans, but it for a lot of people, it has similarities of going to war, right? Because you're fighting for your livelihood, your job, your way of life, your company, the security that you had, that financial security that was the definition of your life, and you're fighting for it.
Right.
Yeah, you highlight a lot of good things there, James, and there has to be more of an understanding, not even just in our community, but just candidly, just in business in general, right? That things are going to happen, right? And hopefully you've done everything you can to mitigate and, you know, ahead of time, but then you have to manage through it, right? And to your point, James, at the end of the day, it's people, right? And so it's people that have to manage this, and there's long-standing impacts after the fact, and we have to get better at supporting those. And to your point, maybe just shouting out those stories, right? Highlighting those, you know, I don't know what we'll call them, the cyber heroes, right? I don't want to sound grandiose, but I mean, but there's people, to your point, lots of people today who are working actively on this issue, right? And they deserve, you know, quiet recognition at minimum.
Yeah.
Dr. Dwayne.
Yes, I know Dr. Dwayne.
I knew my war comment was going to set people off that were listening. They're like, don't compare it to war. It's not the same. We're not comparing it to war in the event of being in a battlefield, but in the psychological aspect of being at war. So we're not discounting it. This isn't the what's his name, that tight end like from 20 years ago that said like, we're warriors, and you know, in the middle of like the Afghanistan war, you're like, no. I think that was Kellen Winslow, if I'm not mistaken, who said that. So yeah.
Okay, Early's back. Thanks for reading my comment to the group that SolarWinds saga is continuing to unravel. Have you all heard about CISO's command to all U.S. agencies to either take SolarWinds app offline or update immediately?
I think that was pretty known at the time. They told everyone right away to do that. I think now they're just kind of making it public.
Burn it to the ground. I think that was the quote.
Yeah.
Rebuild. Yeah.
Love you, Dutch. Bad comparison. Many CEOs fail to take preventative actions in cyber.
We can't blame the CEOs completely, though. Like, the security leaders need to step up and influence their C-level folks. They can't just be like, "Oh, it's your fault," you know.
Yeah.
Like the CISOs and the security leaders have a role in this.
Well, yeah, it's right. I agree, Naomi. So I'm trying to make sure I got Dwayne's comment correctly, but yeah, here's the thing, right? At the end of the day, collectively we manage risk, right? That's really right. What we do, and this is not new, right? We've been managing risk for hundreds, thousands of years, right? And so what's new is making sure that the ownership of risk sits at the right place to align then the resources and the reaction to that risk, right? And so on the one extreme, what I've seen is, the CISOs are only on the hook, right? And so to the points we were making earlier, that's super stressful for then everybody in the entire team, right? That has a sort of zero fault, kind of scenario, and that's always bad, right? That doesn't produce good results. It's super stressful. Under stressful conditions, people make narrower choices, right? They're less creative. There's a whole tiering of things that happen, right? So it's more around everybody has to understand that risk is owned by the business, all risk, all types of risk, right? And that includes cyber risk, right? So from my perspective anyway, CISOs have to inform about risk, have to build culture, right? And have to help manage and mitigate the risk, right? But again, just from my perspective, the business owns the risk, just like they would own any other risk. And so until you get that construct, built in and all the workflows and all the informal relationships, right, to move that direction, then it can't just be the CISO and their team on the hook, right?
Wow.
It's not going to lead to positive results.
So let's do this for a minute, right? Let's go to the filling shoes of a CEO of an organization, right? Because we're always talking about it from a security perspective. So if you're a CEO of a company, you've got 750 things to worry about before you get to security, right? If you've got investors, then you're worried about your investors and you're worried about your sales and your performance and your revenue. You're working with your product team. You're working with your marketing team. You're looking at your IT and network, and you're hiring people to do that for you, and you're trusting them to get the job done. Once I spoke to a group of CEOs this year, and my question to them was, how do you time manage your time between all the different responsibilities a CEO has? And one of the questions that I looked at was, they kind of look at security and risk. And I think this is really important for us to understand. And they say, well, I hire someone to do that. He works with the CIO who understands what he's supposed to be doing. So look at where he's coming from. He doesn't think that security's job is to audit the CIO, but he thinks security is to complement the CIO. And that was common in a lot of my conversations with CEOs, right? So here's where our gap, when we talk about where a CISO should report to, well, here's CEOs telling you, well, he should work with the CIO because, that's part of IT. And then when you start to explain that, well, security's a wider net, it's not just IT, it's data, and it's not just data, it's compliance, and it's not just compliance, it's global operations, and it's not just global operations, it's also geopolitical, and it's not just geopolitical, you're talking about legal consequences and business advantages and your own IPs and all that other stuff. And then they start to take that in and go, well, okay, that makes sense. Now I get it, right? But we don't have that conversation, because when we're talking to the CEOs, we're thinking as a CISO rather than as a business leader. What does he want to know, right? And what does the board care to know? And so if you're a CISO of a company like I am that operates in a bunch of countries globally, right? Like we operate in a lot of countries. I think we operate in over 40 or 45 countries now. I have 40 or 45 different regulators.
So, and maybe, I don't know if Naomi was heading this direction, but again, so I'm going to go back to inform, right? So that's from my perspective, one of the key aspects, right? And so you have to kind of step back and go, look, the role is still really new. And I know we've talked about this in the past, right? But the role, especially moving to a different reporting structure, is really new, right? And so it's critical to make people aware of where should this fit in? And I don't have a one size fits all opinion, right? I don't know, each person's companies and their culture is different, right? I tend to not think it should be under a CIO, but there's probably times when that makes sense. But if you go back in time, we're also in a trajectory where people are coming away from being just the strongest. Naomi is the strongest security person, right? And she puts effort and talent, and she moves onward, right? But if you go back and look at the CIO role, right? There's a white paper written in 1981 where they're debating, should they be a technical person like a database administrator, or should they be a people manager? Does that sound familiar, guys?
Right.
We're tracking 50 years behind the CIO role, right?
Yeah.
It's the same trajectory, right? So there's multiple things happening. One is businesses have to understand that just digital transformation in general has made cybersecurity commensurate with board level risk. That's the macro level change, right? To your point, James. So now it's affecting the entire business. That's what arguably triggers the CISO to move to the adult table from the kids table at Thanksgiving, right? Okay. And so now you have to, but there's changes that have to occur. A CISO then has to say, hey, look, I'm a huge fan of Gary Hayslip, like a lot of people, right? A CISO is a business executive who just happens to manage risk. That's how he says, right? He just happens to manage risk, right? That's a really interesting viewpoint. So, when I work with other people, that's what we talk about is like, how does your business think about risk? Like, let's just step back. How do you think about risk, right? If you're a public company, Section 1A, better say your risk. You better have some explicit cybersecurity and implicit cybersecurity risks in there. If you don't, you're failing, right? The board has to establish that. And as the CISO, then you have to inform. If they're not there, you have to work on that because that's where it has to end up. It can't just be, to your point, James, I hired a person. That does not work.
And some of the more mature,
Right.
some of the more mature,
of course, we have to coach them.
Yeah, are doing that. So you see CISO reporting
Absolutely.
to like the SVP of risk management and things like that, or reporting directly to the board. Or directly to the CEO, like now the Equifax CISO is. So, as we evolve, I think you will start to see that. James, you were saying something?
So one of the things I want to do for 2021 is really start to engage the CEOs into cyber discussions from a perspective of how do you see it, and kind of trying to bridge those gaps. Because if you ask any cyber person, like, hey, what do you do in cyber, right? And how do you deal with your risk? They'll be like, well, I'm in fintech and I go this way, and I'm in government and we do this, and I'm in healthcare and we have to worry about that. And to me, I just feel like we can't be niche when it comes to security. Like, it's got to be almost universal because healthcare is supported by fintech, right? Like, everyone takes money. Like, if you don't take money, I'm a little bit concerned about your business at that point, and I'm wondering how you're doing it. But everyone takes money, so everyone's dealing with some level of information, and we live in a SaaS world where the data that you have or get isn't always just going through your pipes. It's kind of like public water systems or electricity or internet. It's kind of going through everything, and it can at any point in period in time get intercepted or blocked or whatnot.
Dr. Dan is here. Dr. Dan says, wondering what it costs a CEO to not be aware of it. Zero, because they never get fired. The only CEO to ever be fired post-breach was Equifax, and he wasn't even fired. He got $90 million to retire. No.
He got $90 million. His name's Richard, but everyone called him Dick. Dick Smith got $90 million and was sent home packing. $90 million. That was his parachute. His severance.
His severance package.
Right. I mean, so here's an analogy, and it's not perfect, right? And that's, I had this discussion with in earnestness, right? Like people are like, no, but I own risk. And I'm like, okay, but let's talk about this. Okay. So I've been at public companies, private companies, IPOs, during an IPO, right? And to James' earlier comment, and inevitably a company will have a bad quarter, right? And I said, so far, 0 times in my 25 years have I seen a CFO be fired. I'm not picking on CFOs, by the way. But my point is that would be commensurate. Like, oh, we had a bad quarter, fire the CFO. Well, you're in charge of finances. That's not how that works, right? Ultimately, the ownership of risk, in my estimation, is the CEO, right? Board set risk appetite and risk tolerance. The CEO, like all risk, should own that risk. I mean, I know that's ideal, right? And it's aspirational because I see some of the comments. I agree, we're not there, right? But that's really where it belongs. It's a business risk, just like the risk of competition, the risk of an issue with the product line, a risk with natural disaster occurring, a risk with arbitrage, currency flood, all the normal risks. Cyber is one of those risks, right? So yes, you have a Naomi or a James who is the domain expert, right? Who should be informing, establishing culture, workflow, all the things, right? That we all do day to day. But ultimately, that doesn't mean like, oh, I get to pin it. That's only Naomi.
This totally reminds me of what teachers are going through right now. Like if you think about it, all the teachers are being blamed that, their kids aren't learning at home. But like the teacher's like, oh, this is not just my responsibility, parents. Like you should be teaching your kids also things. But now during the pandemic, we realize how important teachers are. All of a sudden it's like teachers like, well, we've been telling you this is a shared responsibility. This is not just us. Right. But the parents right now are like, no, I can't do this. I can't do this. But, I'm at that point with you, Dutch. Like, it is a shared responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility, not just parenting and teaching. Security is everyone's responsibility. I will say that to the moon and back.
Yeah. Again, I don't think there's a one size fits all to some of the comments. And I'm super aware that NGOs and charitable organizations, there's different cultures, different structures. But again, at a macro level, we have to get to a better place, right? And James, to your point, we're all in this together. Like when I talk with people in critical industries, right? Supply chain and third party risk is right up here, because to your point, I'm trying to think of a good abstract way to not mention somebody specifically. Let's say that I'm in the healthcare industry, right? And so Renee, you go in to get something done. Well, they send you to a clinic, and that clinic then outsources the billing of that to somebody else, right? So now you're 4 levels down, and Susan and Tim, who are at that outsource, they don't have the same sense of response. It's not because it's a mistake of effort, right? It's not because they're trying to do something wrong. They don't know Renee, right? They don't see the connection because they're way downstream. But ultimately, who gets the sort of the brand hit for that when it goes badly is that first tier healthcare company, right? So ultimately, everybody along that chain we just have to get better, because James, to your point, it impacts everybody else.
Yeah, comments. You want to do comments? Because they are flying.
Well, I have a question for Dutch then. Like, what would be a solution for this? Like, how do you actually get people to start doing this?
Yeah, so I think it starts with you have to take, it's like eating the elephant, right? We have to pick pieces and start with that, right? So start with, okay, who's my next tier down, right? And spend time with, hey, here's my security culture. Here are the things that I think are important, because, by the way, they may not be the obvious things. The example I've used before is I worked with a beverage company, and I was going through just kind of normal kind of high-level risk analysis. And I just sort of presumed that like their customer data, PI, normal things. I'm like, hey, these are your risks, right? And they're like, no. Well, they are, like from a compliance and a governance standpoint. And I said, oh, what do you really care about? And then I thought, oh, is it your formulas? Is it your formulas that you have for the different drinks? And they laughed, and I'm like, no. They're like, we all have a bunch of chemists. We backwards re-engineer. I can tell you exactly what's on all of my competitors' things, which was kind of interesting. And I said, so what do you care about? Those are marketing campaigns. If those get out in advance, that is disastrous for us because they're a brand, right? I mean, and so it just simply reoriented me to, hey, I don't always know. Like we don't, somebody that doesn't. So number one, you need to like explicitly determine what is my culture. If it's not where I want it to be, how do we start moving that culture where we want it to be? It has to be everybody in your enterprise. It can't just be the 4 of us. If Renee doesn't click on a phishing link, okay, yay. I mean, we would expect her not to click on the phishing link. It is the other 95% of your employees. It's the person who's on an old machine with an old browser in the transportation center. That's where a big risk lies right there. So you have to get everybody to understand so it's a cultural thing, Naomi. You have to get the leadership to say, hey, this is important. And one of the ways, if you look at changing culture just in general, is it's how you tell stories, right? So those stories that you share, kind of we're back to our heroes discussion, right? Those are critical. Like executives have to start sharing the stories like, hey, Renee clicked on this link, but as soon as she did, she realized, oh, wait, I think I saw a thing on that. And she contacted James, who's her cyber champ. And he's like, okay, we're going to quarantine this and we're going to take care of it, right? And you need to tell those stories so people can go, that's the right behavior. They have to know what the right behavior is. And candor, like it's not just doing training. Like you need to do that. That's not enough. Culture is implied. So you have to shine a light on it and say, hey, these things are important to us as an entity, as an organization, as a company. And you do that through stories and you do it through reinforcing. And when people make a mistake of effort, you say, it's okay. Renee, we're not firing Renee, right? Renee did the next. When you do something and it's incorrect, do the next right thing.
I hear you.
James is their cyber champ. We fixed it. Right.
I remember the discussion around employees. I was at the Electronic Crime Task Force roundup here in Atlanta last year. And several of the CISOs were like, yeah, we're starting to implement a policy where we do awareness training in our org. And if you fail it 3 times, you can be fired for it. And I'm like, wow. Wow.
What was that company that was it GoDaddy that sent out that phishing test?
I was just going to say GoDaddy.
Yeah, so those are the kind of things that security leaders need to start being self-aware of things, and like let's teach ourselves how to be better humans instead of like the black box machines that we are, like we think we are. We don't just take inputs and generate outputs. Like we need to operate at human level. We need to improve our level of EQ and empathy. And we need to start making human connections, telling stories, like you said, Dutch. Like we need to influence and teach. Like not only are we managing risk, but we are also teaching about security from all different levels within an organization. And security leaders have to be great people. Great people.
It's leadership, right?
It's all leadership.
So it just happens to be that our domain is security, but it's leadership. I mean, there's nothing new to that part of it. We just have to make the switch, like I said, from, being, and I love banging on a keyboard too, but you have to make that switch that it's about the people. If you can't get all of the people, you're going to fail.
And here's where we're failing as an industry. We don't teach ourselves how to be great human leaders. We don't have courses on cyber. We don't have courses on Pluralsight, like how to be an effective CISO from a human side. Like there is no psychology behind all the courses. It's literally just like tech.
Well, there's some of that is starting to come into play, though. I've, in my research, I've started to see some companies where they've got a psychologist in part of their awareness creation team that's really kind of focused on the psychology of human beings or using human behavior analytics in order to really train a different way for people to operate. So, I mean, that stuff's going to come through. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of it's just a matter of time, and it's a matter of people adopting it, right? Like you see something like that now, I mean, you go, all right, I'm not going to do the traditional awareness, trainings and phishing tests. I'm really going to start doing something that's, based on each individual user and their computer competency. So someone who's in their, 50s or 60s, is going to operate a computer a lot different than a 23-year-old out of college. That's just a fact.
Right.
Right.
And I'm surprised that, James, that these security awareness companies, tests, what have you, with phishing didn't automatically have some of them do, because it would only make sense to me as someone with that HR background that it always goes back to the human, like every single time.
And it has to be important. I'm looking at Dr. Dwayne's comments and Jesse. Hey, Jesse. Right. It has to be. You have to make it be intrinsically important to every person. They have to understand, right? You can't go, well, cool, we did our quarterly phishing training and we're done. And again, I'm not begging. Like you should do quarterly. I'm agreeing that the training is important, right? The difference is you have to establish the culture and a climate that they go, well, this is important. It's not just something that Renee does over there. We all have to do this. And so again, how you do this, you should give them examples of this. Why is this important, right? And so another way of thinking about this is I talk about like quality, right? Today, we all just assume quality is intrinsically important. By the way, that was a revolution that happened to make that happen, right? It used to be in the 1920s, it was just Naomi's craftsmanship, right? We would go to her because she was an artisan, right? The whole revolution of quality changes. So now everybody, whether you're in logistics or transportation or legal, everybody thinks quality is important. That took somebody shining a light on it, multiple people, right? Dr. Schuhart started it really, right? And then Drs. Deming and Geron later, right? But it took a long time also. It took decades for people to understand that quality was important. It sounds dumb today to say that, but it started with math, right? Statistical, quality control, but ultimately got to the point where everybody goes, well, quality is important. Like we all have to have quality, built into what we do. We all have to have security built into what we do. Until you get to that mental headspace, you're going to be chasing it.
James had a good point. Sorry, Renee.
Things as basic as washing your hands. There was a time.
Right.
There was a time, right? There was a time when doctors in hospitals, they didn't believe, like, washing your hands wasn't, they didn't understand where people were getting the infections. They didn't understand where people were dying, how people were dying.
What, you mean touching a bunch of other infections?
Oh, yeah.
Right. Well, not only that, there's a period
picking your nose and touching your body parts and door handles, and then
all
touching
of that.
someone who's immunocompromised.
There was a period where it was actually a badge of honor to be a barber or a doctor and have blood. Right? Did you guys read that? I mean, I remember if it was Chris Roberts. Somebody brought this up recently, right? That because if you were, it was like, well, you can't. I mean, you're not getting your hands dirty. You're not doing your work. Right. Like it was actually the complete opposite.
Right? Like men with soft hands weren't considered to be men. Right? Like if you didn't have battle scars on your hand, you weren't a man.
Yeah.
So it's back to perspective. I see the comments here, right? Like, right. It has to be, what's our vision? What's our mission? What's important? What's culturally important to us? And you have to frame it that way, because otherwise you're just throwing training at it and you're just making it the security team's problem. It cannot be just the security. We can do a lot of things, but we cannot solve all of the things because humans.
And so here's where it's important, though.
Good.
But James made a good point last week, where we're currently talking in our echo chamber. And I love talking to you, Dutch. I love talking to James, Renee. But we need to get out and we need to make this happen, because if we're just going to stay in here and just be like, or pat each other on the back and how great we're talking about this stuff, like we don't have the action to follow up. Like if you have a conversation with your CEO and you're not talking about this stuff, like you're just talking BS currently. And you're not making it better.
So how about we do this, Naomi? I've got a challenge, and Dutch and Renee, let's. I always put a challenge every week here, right? We have one challenge that starts tomorrow. InfoSec hires. We're going to get 10 people hired by sharing their profiles on LinkedIn under the hashtag InfoSec hires, right? But here's another challenge. I host a CISO Talk podcast, so I'm going to reach out to a bunch of CISOs that are willing to come on the show with their CEOs and talk about the successful things and the challenges they have in security. So if you know a CISO, if you're a CISO and you work with a CEO and your CEO is willing to come on a show, we're not going to ask about your security stuff. I don't want to know if you use, AWS or Azure, right? Or if you use CrowdStrike or Carbon. I don't care, right? The idea is, how do we fix that communication, and then how do we bridge that gap? And so I want to do 4 of those shows next year. I think that's a fair goal, once a quarter, and kind of bring on. So if you know any CISOs that are willing to do this, if you yourself are willing to do it, you can, reach out to me privately. Another challenge issued on CISO Thursdays.
It's an awesome one. It's a really, really, really good one. And I started to do a little bit of it from a leadership perspective with the CIOs. So right now we know that I think 60% of CISOs report into CIOs. So getting them on here with the leadership stuff, we'll talk about that too. So
higher than 60% is kind of low to me.
I think it's 60 to 70%. I saw a pie chart the other day. 60 to 70, I think, are CIOs, and then a sliver is enterprise risk management. A tiny bit is directly to the CEO. And then there's something else. There's some people reporting into legal, like your chief legal officer.
It makes sense for some companies, though. Like it really does.
Yeah.
It depends.
All right, comments.
Well, Naomi, do we hit your point? That's a great shout out, Naomi. That you're right. If it's just us talking to each other, then we could do this. It's awesome.
We can do this every day.
Right.
We're making a difference.
James threw out a challenge. That's great. But you're right, Naomi. Like, what else can we do? Because until CEOs, COOs, the C's, until everybody starts to get this, so we can't have podcasts where only our loving people that we already know are on.
Right. Bring on some CEOs. Bring on people like CFOs. Let's bring them on the show and talk.
Absolutely.
That's brilliant.
I've got a recommendation last year, and I was looking for some CFOs, but it didn't pan out. But one person, his name is slipping my mind right now, but he talked about the CFO's perspective, right? And how, especially with like budgets and CISOs and security teams, and how the CFO like aligns. And I was like, this is fascinating. This is such good information, because I know, especially folks that are maybe at the CISO level get this, but a step or 2 levels down definitely are not even remotely thinking about things like this. So I agree with you all wholeheartedly. And we're going to go to comments because there's zillions of them here. JJ Davy, our bearded man. What does he call himself? The something honeypot.
The ginger honeypot.
Ginger honeypot. Yes. He says, don't panic, sinkhole all the IOCs. That's when Dutch was talking about that stuff earlier. CEOs don't take action if they are not aware. Security has the job to make people aware of risk to enable senior management to build a plan. So pretty much everything else that we've been saying, much like war, you need the intelligence to ensure your resources are used in the best way possible. Agreed.
Hey, Renee, maybe in 2021, we can rebrand this to be just C-level Thursdays. It doesn't have to be CISO Thursdays. Like anyone at a leadership level can come in. CXO, there you go.
Thursdays.
Yes.
CXO Thursdays. Bring them on.
CXOs and just what are their viewpoints on security? Like they're all gonna sing the song and dance, I promise you. But if you start digging and how do you back that up? How do you back up that song?
No, I think the last couple CIOs that we had on were so, when I talked to them, they were like, this is great because people come in sometimes, and especially, security folks, we're excited. We want to come in and they're like, you can't implement all this stuff. Like you have to think about the business, and they were saying that and they were bringing that to light. So I think they will really start to say like, these are my frustrations, which is what I love to hear. I'm like, what are your frustrations? What's, when you see a security person, like, how do you bring them into leadership? Because that's what a lot of the folks that are here want to know. Like they started out, they were junior, now they're a couple years in, now they want to be a CISO. Okay, when you're a director, when you're a security director, when you're a CISO, when you're a CIO or whoever is hiring, what are you looking for? So they really, really had some good pointers, and I am excited because in 2021, more are coming. Like I've invited some folks, and so they're going to be coming on too. So CXOs, I love it. Okay, so Roman says, in addition to encouraging folks who have an interest in the cybersecurity path, we could also create a forum to give shout outs to cyber leaders and professionals who sacrifice their time and life daily. I know we signed up for the exciting journey in the cyberspace, but it also comes with battle injuries. Romy, I 100% like you guys. I feel like I'm beamed to you all because I totally thought about this. I was like, we should be shouting people out that deal with just, CISOs, people, just folks in general, security folks who are dealing with this stuff. So I agree.
So Dr. Dan saying being comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's good.
Dr. Dan is always on point. Dr. Dan, we got to make him part of the seed stuff too. The dualism, Jesse says, the dualism of not including cybersecurity leadership in meetings, but looking to them for reaction and incident response must be dissolved. I think that's a really good point. Interesting information, James. Breaches have really profound impacts. I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. I think that's when James was talking about, the mental health issues. So, and Erdley says, you made some great points regarding the mental health issues that can occur due to cybersecurity hacks. As a U.S. Marine veteran, I totally agree with you, bro. Perhaps we can consider providing better work-life balance when reacting to hacks.
I think the challenge with that is none of us want to go home when a hack happens. Like we all want to get it done. Like people are really mission focused. I think that's one of the downfalls of it. It's like if you're in a battle, right? Like when we're in the military, like if you're in a gunfight, you don't say, hey guys, listen, it's 11 o'clock. Why don't we all go to sleep? Come back 7:30 after breakfast and we'll just keep shooting at each other.
All right.
Like,
but you're back to leadership, right, James? I mean, that's why we have block leave, right? I mean, I'm sure you've been on block, right? Where at some point, like, I don't know, like, as an officer, like I would just give my people time, like I'd be, hey, just go home today. Like,
yeah.
But how many times do your people how many times do they fight back?
Oh,
they fight back.
It's okay, but I would still do that. I'd say, look, Thursday after this time, I don't want to see any of you. You should all just go away. That's what I tell them.
Well, I mean,
you got to find ways to inject it. Like when you can, again, and when something's critical, you may not have the time at that point in time, but you need to do it when you can, right? Whatever. And sometimes you can't do everything. Like, and I'll take it to a civilian place where, like, I had a team who was under duress, and it doesn't really matter. They were under stress, and I just said, hey, look, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna get somebody to cover all of our stuff today. I work with my peers to cover all of our work. right? I got a conference room. I brought in beer and pizzas, and we watched Office Space. And for 3 hours, we didn't do anything. And that was the most I could do. I would try to do other things, and I couldn't because we were the company was at a challenging point in time. But you can always do things, right? You can feel connected, part of the mission, to be human, right? They need to have that. And you need to say, hey, like, let's everybody lower your shoulders and relax. Like you need to find ways to do that.
I had a CISO that did exactly that. And he also had like made somebody go home. He was like, go home now, leave now. Like
no, and that's okay. I mean, that's part of doing it, right? Is knowing, and I agree with you, Dutch, like sending people home, giving them time off, doing all of that is really, really important. And the work-life balance is critical. I think if we go to COVID, one of the I think biggest challenges early on was all of us were plugged in. That there were times where I'd be sitting here and I'd look out the window at 10 a.m. and then I'd look back out again and it's 8:30 p.m. It's dark outside, right? And I'm like, I've been sitting in this chair for, nearly 10 hours and I haven't moved.
Right.
Dwayne says there's some CISOs that are executives and others are non-executives. It depends on the culture to include profit versus nonprofit organizations. Not all CISOs are on the board. That's a book definition. Yeah, sure. We know that for sure. I don't think many are. I don't think are any on the board. Many CISOs don't own risk and have people that report have not had people that report to them at all. We do need to start asking non-cyber people how they see it. Yeah. This is from JJ. Agree. Clinton. However, there are laws to get CEOs in
prison. He means prison.
Oh, to put them in prison if they suffer a breach around IoT breaches. More and more of this will be the case. Same with CISOs as well as in the future.
So that's a really interesting point. So Russ Young and I had this debate a while ago, which was should CISOs be licensed like pilots, meaning beyond your cert? Should there be like an FAA authority for CISOs to where if you're going to be a CISO, you should have a license? So the reason he said that was, what if in order for you to actually carry the risk, and if you had a license, then the board would be required to put you there. So you'd guaranteed to have a seat. You'd have to definitely report to the CEO at that point, right? Because you'd have to be licensed to do it. And it would require you to do a specific amount of training by pilots. They can't just, they have to spend, I think, 8 hours a month on a simulator. Mm-hmm. Beyond what they fly, and they're only allowed to fly a limited amount of hours and they need rest and so forth. And so he kind of made that argument. I had that same discussion once with Patrick Benoit. Because Pat's a pilot and there's a lot of people in cyber that are pilots, and we kind of had that discussion, and it's a very interesting one because you don't want to put people in prison for being a victim of a cyber breach, right? Because that's kind of like, hey, Renee, you got robbed. Well, it's your fault for leaving your house door unlocked. So we're not going to charge the criminal of doing it. We're going to charge you because you should have locked your door.
I hadn't even heard about this.
There's been stuff that's been circulated by some really weird people in some really weird places about doing something like this. But they're trying to use it as a way to be like, if you don't take this seriously, like you got to read between
holding the person accountable, right?
Right. Like we're gonna pass a law to hold you accountable to it. The law would never make it through because just the law being against the law like that would be insane. It just it wouldn't come into play. But it's a very, I don't think that we should look at government, and I'll say this again, and I think I say that every week, to be the entity that comes to solve all of our problems. If we've learned anything this year, is that relying on government might be the worst thing on the planet to do.
OMG. Romy says, CISOs map out the maturity level of their organization. They have to align regulations with practices and risk with maturity. Funny how many CIOs in 2020 are not aware of certain tools like FCAT. Newsflash, managing an organization is not all about people. Take into consideration the tools, resources, and the infrastructure that manages the assets. Dwayne says, Romy, that is a fact. With Dutch, when you were talking, I put this up there because they were saying, well said, Dutch. And Naomi and I were behind the scenes saying, Dutch needs a podcast. Solution is teamwork. Dwayne, everyone is anyone in your enterprise leadership culture is good CEOs. Oh my gosh. Okay, so Mr. My Side. Where are we here? They loved your end comments. Humans want to act like computers now. Romy says this, acting like the machines we built sounds like an iRobot movie.
Is there a movie that Will Smith hasn't done?
I
feel like this year has been a Will Smith rerun of movies.
it has definitely felt like that. Tyrone says, are CISOs seen on the same level as other C-suite executives? And if not, could this be the problem?
That's we touched on that, right? Yeah, I mean, so the answer is in some cases, right? But that's
like one case.
The maturity curve, right?
In one case. Equifax, that's it. Jesse says here, we need to link mission, vision, values to the security program and show how security is an enabling force. I like that.
Absolutely.
Spot on, Jesse. Spot on. Michelle made a funny comment. We use AI to teach human behavior.
Hey, Michelle.
AI for the human. Dwayne says. Dwayne needs to be on here. I think we definitely do values and missions with security enchantment. Totally.
What would you call him? Would you call him doctor or would you call him major? Like what would his title be?
Doctor
Major Dr. Dwayne Hodges.
Exactly. Major doctor or Dr. Major?
Major doctor.
Major
doctor, because he's not only a doctor, he's a major.
But what comes first?
Major, because your military is superior to anything else.
Oh, okay.
There it is. We've been schooled.
We could ask Dr. Dwayne. I would call him Dr. Dwayne because I know him, but I mean, we could ask.
We could just ask.
We could ask him.
Here comes the comment. Right. If you call him a major doctor, that means he's a really major doctor.
Major Dr. Dwayne.
Major is an adjective.
Right.
Dirty coffee cup on the desk. So funny. Early said he loved the end of Dutch's last comment because, and he took a long pause, humans. Yep. Okay, get some.
This is a good point.
Which one?
Well, no, Dr. Dwayne's making a good point on, right. That's one of the other levers to pull, right? Is we like, not only do we have to start from the top down and start to try to figure out how do we change culture and get engagement across the business, but he's right. The long path, or longer path maybe, but a really solid one is we got to start with the students as well. So if you're going, you guys talked about trainings and certifications in school last week, right? So if it's really how to do fill in the blank, Python, how to do pen testing, how to do whatever, we're failing. We're failing, right? Because we're not setting them up for success. Everything that we do in cybersecurity is about enabling the business. Yep. The business exists for the sake of the business, whatever that is, whether it's an NGO or a charity or for profit, they exist for whatever that mission is, right? You have to respect that. And business leaders get to decide it's a balancing game, right? How much risk am I knowingly willing to accept, right? And when it goes outside of that parameter, outside of that risk tolerance, how do we react, right? But at the end of the day, it's still enabling the business. So if we only teach tech, we're failing.
Absolutely.
For tech's sake, it exists to enable the business, and you have to make that tie between the two.
100% agree.
Yeah, we need to train and mentor the human for sure. And here's where I kind of am happy when I think about it. Like, we as cybersecurity professionals will always have a job, because as long as we are coming up with creative human solutions to deal with real human problems and business human problems, we will always have a job, because we are the only humans right now, at least that I can think of, that can solve these kind of human level problems. AI can't do it for us. So I think we're okay.
Major Dr. Dwayne says leadership has been talking amongst themselves for years and still getting hacked. Get your subordinates involved. So true. Yep. So true. I should definitely invite CEOs like Jade Scarver. Yes, invite her early. Dr. Dan says, seems like it would help to let them know what they need to know and how to find out. What about helping them be comfortable with being uncomfortable? Dan always has it's like wisdom coming through. Early says, this may be a long shot, but I should also consider inviting Nutanix CIO. Go for it. Yeah, invite them all. Invite them. We'll help you. We'll collectively get together. You are all sitting under Niagara Falls, Dr. Dan says. The attacks never stop. To a better 2026. Did anybody see our 2026?
I did. Yeah. I saw that one. Yeah. Think about the future, right?
So the folks that don't know, Dr. Dan and I, Dr. Dan always has his clients 5 years out looking backwards. So right now, all of us are in 2026, figuring out how to not screw up 2025, 4. So that's Dan's mantra. Early says, I hear you, James, but as I think there's a staggered rest for one's team, everyone doesn't have to work all the time. That's when we're talking about mental health. Scott says CEOs don't, CFOs don't, but we should. I don't know.
He's talking about
all the time.
Yes, when they get yep. And Scott says here, yeah, we should, but that should be self-imposed directive. My issue is own and breach liability without such training. JJ, we can't stop all attacks. However, we can be prudent in our activities. I believe proving due diligence, care in regards to cybersecurity, then we should stop finger pointing to C-level people and show support instead. 100%. This through LOL Army ranks
Trumps.
Army ranks
Easy green.
Trumps.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yep. Told y'all. I told you.
Major
Army
doctor.
Army trumps it all.
We got school.
Dr. Dwayne.
But is it retired major doctor? Retired major doctor, is it, or no, just major? Major doctor.
You're never retired.
No retired.
When you're a veteran, you're never retired. You're always in.
My bad.
Yo, James, you're starting to sound like the great U.S. President Ronald Reagan. Government is not the solution to your problem. Government is the problem. It's sounding kind of much more.
You know what else he said? He said, President Reagan said, the scariest words are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
and to just deliver that point home with a home run, our government spends $1.5 million walking lizards on treadmills as part of their COVID bailout plan. I just want you all to know that $1.5 million are going to study lizards walking on treadmills
with little leashes.
I wonder if they have leashes or not.
I'm picturing leashes. I can't imagine them.
Leashes too. I know.
I wonder if they have a leash, and then at the end of it, they put like something a lizard wants to eat, and they're like, walk to it, and then they turn on the treadmill, takes it back, and just keep doing that to the lizard.
It's that little gel.
This would be like a whole pod for James. James, you should just find these weird DARPA projects and just comment on them, for an entire podcast.
We need to have James come in with the news, but like the James news. That's what we'll call it. James,
I care about my tax money. I don't want,
that'll be a segment.
$1.5 million for some people is life-changing.
Yeah, I'll take it.
I'll walk the lizards. I'll do it.
Maybe
yeah, Naomi's like, I'll walk on a treadmill for $1.5 million. Shit, how long I got to do it for?
Yeah, exactly.
Dan said, and the problem is. Yes, we'll collectively. I think we would all collectively split that $1.5 million to walk on.
Absolutely.
Oh my God.
Good point, though, right? You're back to there's just sort of can be a perception, right? So I'll just speak for officers, right? That like you're sitting somewhere and you make these decisions and you don't involve any other people. I mean, you can do that, but then you're a terrible leader. Like, I'll just put it out there. Okay, that's how it works, right? It's the same thing, right? The way that I'll be specific to the Army, but it's similarly through all the services, right? Officers have, in some cases, a lot of education and less experience, right? And then they start to merge, right? But if you're a smart officer, what you do is you leverage all of those learnings from the people. Like, you don't just make stuff up, say, okay, we're going to go do this, and this is that's not how you do that. You get a mission that's given to you, and you talk it over with your leaders. And go, okay, the book says to do A. Should we do A? And they go, hell no, we did that in Panama. It doesn't work. Okay, cool. What do you think, James? I mean, that's it's the same thing. I mean, so take that into the civilian sector. If you're just sitting there you shouldn't be making those decisions on your own, building strategies by yourself, right? It's who are the practitioners? What are you seeing? What's happening? And they need to know that their opinions are valuable. They're super valuable. You're the person who's actually
they're the person on the ground. They're the person doing with their hands in the work.
Absolutely.
Well, go to like big corp CISOs, right? Like people who have a 500 person team or 1,000 person team, and ask them, what tool do you use in your SIM? I guarantee you they wouldn't be able to answer that.
I'm laughing because Major Dr. Dwayne, I was enlisted as well. So I was enlisted and an officer. So I'm +1ing your comment there.
Major Dr. Dwayne says, thank goodness I was enlisted. What's the butter bag? I don't know.
So when you're lieutenant,
Butter bar.
when you're lieutenant, yeah, it's a little gold bar. So that
gotcha. That's when you graduate up.
It essentially means at that point you're a lifer and you're not leaving ever. It's like Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you never leave.
You never leave. Oh, Major Dr. Dwayne says all TOs and all generals are not leaders because they fail, just as Dutch said, because they fail to make strategic decisions because they leave the troops out of the big deals. So true.
Yep. Right. Leadership and management, not the same, right? They're not the same thing.
Not the same at all.
Management is about process and workflow.
Yep.
It's ensure things happen, and you have to have that. But just because you give Dutch a management title doesn't mean I'm a leader. And then conversely, you don't have to have a title to be a leader. And I don't mean that to sound flippant. I know it's something we could stitch on a quilt, but it's true, right? I mean, leadership is about connecting with other people and helping move them forward. That's at the end state. That's all it's about, right? And so you could have a title and not do that. And hopefully you work those people out because you don't want them. It's not about that, right? It's about moving everybody forward, right? And how you do that is you get them fired up and connected, just like everybody here on this call.
Absolutely. So Romy says a DISC assessment is an adequate tool to figure out individual strengths and probably use results to place folks in the right position for success. Some leaders avoid such assessments because they don't see the relevance for self-assessment, just thinking through how we could improve human interaction and performance in organizations. We had a discussion. There was a young lady she did DISC assessments and other assessments on not this particular show, but one of the other ones. And I'm all for assessments. I mean, we're in the process of writing this Breaking Into Cyber book with Chris Foulon and Gary. So we're talking about, and part of it is assessments and, take self. We know the military does it all the time. As people come in, you get assessed, and that's when they figure out where to slot you, all that kind of stuff. So totally agree with that. And
for the people rolling their eyes about self-assessments, there's real data behind this. There's research. There's years of evidence. That stuff works.
Yeah, the military does it all the time. Dr. Dan has an awesome assessment that he does with his exams. I think it's called the Hogan, which is one that when they bring in C-suite executives, a lot of times it's this full assessment, to really see where you are as a leader.
James kind of touched on this about psychologists, right? And so let me just +1. And I know he was bagging on liberal arts degrees, but I have my undergrad's in history, by the way. Took a little bit.
James is anti-liberal arts.
Yeah, but we need people from other degrees and other domains.
Degree, but don't pay for it. How about that?
Yeah, don't pay for a liberal arts degree. That should be like something free, like here.
You're hilarious. But we need that to inform from a leadership culture standpoint, right? We do. I mean, so all kidding aside, right? So, the ability, and also you can do a cultural assessment, because I've had people ask me, well, how do we? Go look. I mean, you can do a cultural assessment of where are we at, even if it's just 4 of us starting a company tomorrow, right? Like, what's important to us? What do we want to focus on? So you can do that. So I'm all in favor of. You got to give people the tools, right? And yet it starts with, well, where am I? All right. And not facetiously, but against something, right? Just a way to understand, what am I strong at? Where can I use improvement? That'd be a big help.
Major Dr. Dwayne is laughing his ass off. He thinks this is so funny. Is he
laughing with us or at us?
I think he's laughing at James' liberal arts degree.
Yeah, that's just.
I have 2 degrees. Sounds like you need.
They made lemon laws, right? For someone to sell you a bad car. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, liberal arts degree is literally the lemon of college degrees.
It's learning how to learn, James.
Right. Exactly.
I'm going to bring all of liberal
What
arts.
is high school for? What is middle school for? What are parents for? What are grandparents for? What is a community for?
I'm bringing all the CISOs with liberal arts degrees on here. That's what's next. It's going to be the liberal arts.
And all you're going to do is you're going to prove my point because they're all like, I graduated, spent 4 years trying to find. I was in sales. I was doing all kinds of crap. And then I was like, I got to get a real job. And I went and I got a cert and started in cyber.
I have a CISO. I forget his name right now, but he's coming on here. I'm bringing him on CISO Thursdays with you. Talk about you.
I will debate anyone on this. James had like a bad experience. Like he had a really mean, like.
It was rough.
No, like listen, you know how many people I know that have a liberal arts degree that are like salespeople at Best Buy?
Goodbye, James. So maybe Dr. Dwayne said they have some limits.
Karma's kicking your butt. Your daughter's going to be majoring at English.
No, she won't because I'm not paying for that.
History and English major.
No, we'll
James Azar's daughter. Listen to us. You want to piss your dad off? Tell him that's your major. All right, folks, we need to wrap this up.
We're losing it fast.
We're gonna wrap. Dwayne, Dr. Dwayne, please come on here because you're cracking up. We're gonna have a good time. Michelle says assessments do help understand current state. You can't run a marathon if you've never ran a mile. Amen. And Major Dr. Dwayne says I am a certified CISO and I don't know what that means. A CISO. Nice cert.
Nice.
All right, folks. New Year's Eve is over. Oh my goodness, people are still chiming in. Dan is going to be the last comment. Romy says, look on the bright side. Some learn how to collaborate and communicate effectively. Funny, but some probably learn how to write better, even write their names.
I just got the best meme in the planet. You want to hear it? Someone sent me a meme and to go, it's 2021 in Australia and it's still shit.
They said I have a bachelor's degree in eating.
There you go.
Oh my God. Dan says move people from a management culture to a coaching culture. Fantastic outcomes in remote management. Leaders need to know what they do well before they can help unconscious competence problem. So if you guys want to learn more about that, I'm putting a plug in for our Mondays with Dr. Dan because he is amazing. And today is I cannot believe we did. How many CISO Thursdays did we do?
A couple months worth, I think.
Like 6 months worth?
No, I don't think so.
Not 6
September,
months.
October.
8 weeks worth, something like that. This has been so much fun. The most exciting day of my week is CISO Thursdays. And we are going to wrap it up last of the year. Thank you all for being so awesome and amazing. Thank you, Dutch, for being here.
Yeah,
thank you,
awesome.
Naomi. Thank you, Alex Azar.
Thank you for having us.
I love you all.
I think people are going to start confusing me with HHS secretary because of you.
Yeah.
And, that's going to be very, they're going to be like, what the hell, James?
Happy New Year, everybody.
2020 off in style. What should we do for 2020? Set it off in style.
2021. I don't know. Should we
We
bring
have some
fireworks?
outro music. Yeah.
That's right. I got to have my intro music for next week. That's what I'll do.
All right.
I have outro music for
He
us.
does.
Okay.
I do have outro music. I think so. Hang on. Let me see if I can pull it up.
2020.
What?
Throw your middle fingers in the air, walk away.
We are on LinkedIn, so I don't know that we want to start dropping F-bombs around here. But no, I can't pull up the outro. I'm sorry.
All right, we'll do it next week. We'll start it new, a new year, new fun times. All right, folks.
Happy New Year, y'all.
Happy New Year, everybody.
2021, let's go.
Let's do it.
Bye-bye 2020.